Hey guys, welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be going over the 2024 polling and comparing it to July 9th of 2020 polling at this point in time during Donald Trump's administration to see what are the differences, because clearly back in 2020 at this point in time in Trump's presidency, 9.6% lead for Joe Biden, and you compare that to right now in which Trump is lead. You see a polar opposite shift in trend in favor of the former president. He's now up by 2.4 compared to the 9.6 for Joe Biden just 4 years ago at this current time. And we're going to be filling out these maps. But before we get started, make sure you guys are subscribed. Click the bell so you don't miss out on my content. Also, we have memberships. If you're interested, you can find a link to that in the description section. Give this video a thumbs up, press the like button. Now back to the topic of today's video. So let's begin with filling out some of these battleground states from polls from 4 years ago to now, today. So starting off with the state of Nevada, at this current moment, Donald Trump has an exact lead of 5 percentage points in this state, 43% to Joe Biden's 38%, and Kennedy is polling at 9.6%. And by the way, we didn't have a third-party candidate in 2020. Now, you compare this to, July 9th, polling data from 2020, Biden had nearly, 9% lead, 8.7, compared to Donald Trump's lead of 5%. So this is a huge shift to the right in favor of Donald Trump. So in 2020, Biden was leading Nevada by a likely margin. And now you compare it to 2024, this election, Trump all of a sudden is leading it by arguably a lean margin. So you compare this is a huge difference. And there are clear and obvious trends in this state that favor Republicans. Reno County is shifting towards the right. Even Clark County, the Vegas area, if Donald Trump is able to perform well among Hispanic voters, that's key to his victory. I think he's on track to win this state. Overall, the entirety of Nevada is a red, trendy state. But as for Arizona, it's the polar opposite. This state is actually getting bluer, but let's see what the polls say. So as of right now, Donald Trump has a 4.5 lead in the state of Arizona. And you compare that 4 years ago at this point in time in Trump's presidency, Biden had a 3.5% lead compared to now Donald Trump's 4.5%. So that is a huge swing in favor of the right. So Biden was on track to win it by a lean margin. He ended up winning it by under 1 percentage point, so it overestimated Joe Biden. If you apply that polling error, Trump actually wins it by almost a likely margin, but as of right now, he's winning it by a lean margin according to the polls. So you compare these two maps. This is the 2020 map so far, and now this is 2024, completely two different maps. It's an obvious trend towards the right in favor of the former president. But as for Colorado, in June 9th of 2020, Biden was supposed to win it by 15.6%. He ended up winning it by 13%, so it slightly overestimated him. So he was actually supposed to win it by a safe margin, obviously. And now this time around, majority of polls still say he's more than likely comfortably going to win it, but it's slightly closer of 9 percentage points on average, which is likely instead of safe, so that's obviously another difference. But as for New Mexico, Biden was also supposed to win it by over 10%. He ended up cracking double digits, so that was right. But now, in majority of New Mexico polling, we haven't really had polling in this state, but it's pretty much likely for Joe Biden no matter what. Both Colorado and New Mexico are pretty much trending towards the left. They're just getting bluer, even though they're pretty much already Democratic states. Albuquerque has a lot of white liberals in that state, so that's obviously going to trend towards the left in favor of Biden. You have Colorado, who Democrats are keep gaining. The state just keeps going farther to the left, so it's almost impossible for Donald Trump to overcome the votes in these states. But as for the state of Texas, at this exact point in time in Trump's presidency, June 9th of 2020, he was supposed to win this state by just 1.4%. Guess what? He ended up winning it by 5.5%, so they underestimated the former president by roughly 4 percentage points. And now, in this point in time, in this election, Trump's supposed to win it by 8.6%, which is a huge shift from just 1.4% 4 years ago. So the 2020 map, according to the polls at, July of 2020, at this point in time during Donald Trump's presidency, he was going to win the state of Texas by a tilt margin. He ended up winning it by actually a lean to arguably likely margin. And now the polls are saying he's going to win it by a likely margin. You compare these two maps. This is the 2020 map so far. It's vastly different from the 2024 map. obviously we have obvious, shifts and trends to the right. And then as for the state of Florida, this state is most likely going to overwhelmingly support the former president, as it did in 2020 and in 2016. He might even crack double digits in this state, just like Ron DeSantis did and Marco Rubio, so I wouldn't be surprised. A lot of Hispanics, Cuban Americans specifically, are shifting towards the right in the state. Miami-Dade County flipped to DeSantis and recently went to Biden, but now all of a sudden that county is a red county. So according to Florida polls for 2024, this election, Donald Trump is on track to win it by almost 10%, so 9.5%. And you compare it to, 2020 polls in this state, in which Joe Biden was actually surprisingly supposed to win the state as of July 9th. At this point in time in Trump's presidency, at this exact point, he was going to win it by a likely margin of 6.3%. Obviously, he ended up losing, so that polling error was terrible. That was a terrible polling error. He was supposed to win it by a likely margin, and he ended up actually losing it. He didn't win it at all, not even by a tilt margin. But now Trump is supposed to win it by a likely margin. So these polls, like if you compare these two maps from 2020 polling and the polls that we're seeing today in 2024, are completely two different maps, and it was not really accurate at all. But then as for the state of Georgia, back in 2020, Biden was supposed to win it by 1.7%. He ended up winning it by 0.2%. So it was kind of closer than any other state, but still that's kind of a significant polling error. And you compare it to now in 2024, in which Donald Trump is supposed to win it, according to 538, by around 5 percentage points. So that's going to be a lean margin for Donald Trump. But the 2020, polls said it was going to be lean for Joe Biden. It ended up being tilt at the end of the day ultimately. So these maps are vastly different. The main reason why the state, swung 6 points to the left, because Biden got significant, tremendous turnout among African American voters. He got like nearly 90% among that specific group, which really helped him in Atlanta, the metropolitan area, also the suburbs here in Savannah as well. But I don't expect Biden to get that support, so it's most likely going to flip for Donald Trump. And also, they passed a law in which all absentee ballots, I believe, have to be in by 8 p.m. So this state will be called way faster than where it did, how it, was called in 2020. So we're going to be seeing significant, trends in favors of Donald Trump in this state for this election. But as for North Carolina, Donald Trump is on track to win it by 6.3% if the election was held today in July 9th, which is actually a likely margin. And you take a look at the 2020 polls in this state, it was vastly different. Biden was actually favored. He was supposed to win it on July 9th to 2020 by 3.4%. He ended up losing it. Trump ultimately won it by roughly 1.5 percentage points. So that's a polling error of roughly 4 percentage points. If you actually apply that polling error, North Carolina might actually be safe for Donald Trump, believe it or not. But Joe Biden was supposed to win, and guess what? He ended up losing it. So you compare these two maps. Honestly, North Carolina is getting redder. Believe it or not, this state's actually getting redder. Republicans keep gaining in terms of voter registration. I think it's out of reach for Biden at this point. Even though he was so much favored in 2020, the fact that he was favored as much as he was just 4 years ago, and he still fell short in a state like North Carolina. Come on, guys. Arizona, Georgia, both of those states flipped to Biden, but North Carolina did the exact opposite. It rejected that, and it stayed red for Trump. And this state, I think, will expand its margin for the former president. He would probably win that by like 4 percentage points this time around, in my opinion, but the polls say he's going to win it by even greater of 6.3%. These are two completely different maps if you compare the polling from just 4 years ago. But then as for the state of Virginia, majority of polls has it within under 5% for Joe Biden. The most recent one, with over 1,000 registered voters, has Biden up in this state by only a percentage point. That is extremely low considering that he won this state by 10 points. So that's a 9-point swing to the right, or a shift for Donald Trump. And this is from Fox News. You take a look at any other poll, Biden is under 5%. At the most he's leading by 4 percentage points, which is disastrous for him. So, according to the 2024 polls, Biden's barely going to win this state by arguably a lean or tilt margin at the end of the day. Let's fill it in tilt for now. But you compare it to 2020 polling in this state, in which Biden was supposed to win it by 11.3%. So this was actually kind of accurate. It only underestimated him by 1%, which is better than any other swing state. So if this were to be accurate, Trump, Biden's only going to win Virginia by like 1 to 2 percentage points ultimately at the end of the day. And just 4 years ago, he was supposed to win it by a safe margin, which actually ended up being accurate, surprisingly, because it's not really accurate. Polls are really trash, in my opinion. So as for Iowa, So the most recent poll has Donald Trump winning the state by 18 percentage points, and it's a really highly rated pollster. And now you compare it to 2020 polling in the state of Iowa, in which Joe Biden was actually within, polling error of actually winning this state. And he was actually going to win it, almost. But to 2020 polling in this state, July 8th of 2020, at this point in time in Donald Trump's presidency, this state was a complete tie. It was 50-50, evenly split between the two candidates, which was really off. They underestimated Donald Trump by roughly 8 percentage points because they had it a tie, but he ended up winning it by a likely margin. So we're going to leave Iowa toss-up, which was extremely out of reach with society because Donald Trump overwhelmingly won it in a less favorable year, so he's probably going to win it by even more now, probably cracking double digits. But as of right now, he's winning it comfortably by a safe margin, obviously. And even Ohio, Biden actually had leads in 2020, even though he overwhelmingly lost his state by arguably the same margin as Iowa of like 8 percentage points, a likely margin. He's also winning it by a safe margin in this year's election cycle, but you compare it to 2020, Biden had a lead of 2.6% in this state, which is actually greater than Obama's victory in this state. Overestimated Joe Biden by roughly 10 percentage points, which is horrible for a polling error, by the way. So that would be lean for Joe Biden, which that polling error was just actually disastrous. But then as for the state of Minnesota, this state really favored Joe Biden because obviously we had BLM in this state, we had what happened to George Floyd. That's what really pushed these suburbs here, and Minneapolis specifically to the left. Also, suburban women really favored Joe Biden. They came out in droves. He got high turnout, which ultimately helped Joe Biden win this state. He ended up winning it by 7%. Polls had him winning it by 10.6%, which ultimately overestimated Joe Biden by roughly 3 percentage points. He was supposed to win it by a safe margin in 2020, and now you compare it to the 2024 polls in the state. As of right now, Biden has a lead of just 1% in the state of Minnesota. Keep in mind, folks, how he was winning it, according to the 2020 polls at this current time, by 10 points, and now he's winning it by 1%. So that's a 9-point swing to the right in favor of Donald Trump. So it's going to be a tilt margin, and you compare it to the 2020 map in which it was safe for Joe Biden. These are completely two different maps, and Joe Biden is severely less favored in this election. When you compare it to the 2020 polls, this is completely two different maps. But then as for some of these Rust Belt states, starting off with Wisconsin, in which Joe Biden was supposed to win it by 8 percentage points according to the 2020 polls, which was severely underestimating Donald Trump. He only won it by 0.6%, believe it or not, which is actually less of a margin than Trump's victory in this state back in 2016. So that's like a polling error of roughly 7 percentage points. If you apply the polling error right now to the map, Donald Trump would actually win Wisconsin by a lean to likely margin at the end of the day, which is horrible for Biden. But obviously elections are not decided by polling errors. But then you take a look at the 2024 polls in the state of Wisconsin. So now all of a sudden Donald Trump is favored by 1.4% in this state. And remember, just 4 years ago, Biden was supposed to win it by 8.4% ultimately at the end of the day. So that would be lean for Joe Biden if this was based off the 2020, polling from this state of Wisconsin. And now it's going to be lean for Donald Trump. You compare these two maps, you compare and contrast. These are completely two different maps, obviously in favoring one direction. Back in 2020, Biden was severely favored, and now we have clear winners. Donald Trump is now favored significantly by a substantial margin. In states like New York and New Jersey, which overwhelmingly supported Biden by 16 and 23 points for New Jersey and New York, are now all of a sudden likely for Joe Biden according to the polls. New York is now within single digits for Joe Biden. He has a lead on average of 8 percentage points according to the polls that we are seeing now in 2024 for this election. But even in New Jersey, it's now within a lean margin of 5 to 7% for Joe Biden. This is not good news when you compare it to 2020, in which it was both solid blue for him, and now all of a sudden New York is likely and New Jersey's lean. This is horrible, and it will help Trump with the popular vote, in which he is favored in that as well. But then as for the state of Michigan, Biden was supposed to win it by 9.7%. He ended up only winning it by 2.8%, so nearly 3 percentage points. So that was a polling error of roughly 6 percentage points. But if you apply the polling error to the 2024 map, Trump's going to win Michigan by a lean margin at the end of the day. So Michigan was actually, likely for Joe Biden in the 2020 polls. Now you compare it to 2024, in which Donald Trump, believe it or not, is winning this state by 0.6% according to 538. Now, Trump's lead is actually greater if you take a look at anything else, like Real Clear Politics, RCP, his lead in the state is actually better than this. And considering that he was underestimated, maybe Trump's going to win it by more than just under percentage point if you apply that polling error. So right now he's going to win it by a tilt margin. And you compare it just 4 years ago, in which Biden was winning it by a likely margin. These are completely two different maps, obviously in the opposite directions. And the last and final state before we end off this video, actually we have two more, Pennsylvania and New Hampshire. So as of right now, Donald Trump is the favorite in Biden's own home state, or actually it's Delaware, but he was, born and raised here, by 3.3%. So if you take a look at the 2024 polling map, Trump's lead in Pennsylvania is by a lean margin. That is his margin. And for Biden, just 4 years ago at this, exact time in Trump's presidency, July 9th of 2020, Trump was trailing him by 7.6%. So that's actually likely for Joe Biden. So this state went from, likely blue to now fast forward 4 years later, lean red. These are two completely different maps in favor of Donald Trump for this year's election cycle. But then as for New Hampshire, on average for 2024 polls, Biden's lead in this state is between 4 to 5 percentage points, which we can characterize that as a lean margin. But just 4 years ago, Biden was, favored by even a greater amount than just that, by a likely or maybe even safe amount. He was supposed to win it by 8.3%. Realistically, he ended up winning it by 7 percentage points. So it was likely for him, and now in 2024, it's going to be lean for Joe Biden. Here you guys go. This is the finalized 2020 map according to the polls as of July 9th. At this, exact time in Trump's presidency of 2020, Biden was supposed to win, the election with 366 electoral votes to Donald Trump's 166. This is the 2020 map according to the 538 polls, and obviously he only won it by 306 electoral votes, which was 60 electoral votes overestimating Joe Biden. And now in 2024, you compare the maps. Trump is supposed to win the election with 312. So considering that they underestimated Trump, you apply a polling error, he can, pass 330 electoral votes. So these are two completely different maps. I think 2024 will probably be more on the accurate side than it was compared to 2020. So that's pretty much it. Let me know your thoughts and opinions in the comment section down below. Do you think the polls will be accurate when you compare these two maps from 2020 and you fast forward now to 2024? One last final reminder is to subscribe, click the bell so you don't miss out on my content. Also, we have memberships. You can, find a link to that in the description section if you are interested. Press the like button, give this video a thumbs up. That's pretty much it. Thank you everyone for watching.